What's up, everybody? It's Ronald. If you like the work we're doing here at It's Big Ron Studios and want to see it grow and improve, I want to invite you to join our Patreon. Patreon is a service that allows listeners, like you, to support producers, like me, in creating quality content. Your support helps us pay for remote production with guests around the country, buy new equipment and merch, and even helps to produce great live events like the show we had in 2019. Not only that, but you get stuff like inside information on upcoming projects, discount codes to future live events, and It's Big Ron swag like stickers, magnets, and tote bags. So if you want to join the team, go to patreon.com/ohitsbigron and become a patron today for as low as $2 a month. That's patreon.com/ohitsbigron. And if you join between now and October 2nd, I'll send you a special holographic It's Big Ron sticker. So join now. Thanks again for listening. And with that, let's start the show. The story you're about to hear is true, but some names have been changed and or censored to protect the petty. Recently, there was a sports story that resonated with me. It happened during a football game between the Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers. The teams play in the same division in the National Football League and are located in cities that are a short 2-hour drive away from each other, so it's a big rivalry game. The final seconds of the final quarter were running out, and the Steelers were losing 21-7. It looked like the Browns would emerge with the victory and the bragging rights, but then something unusual happens. With 16 seconds remaining in the game, the Steelers attempt to run one final play. The Steelers quarterback, Mason Rudolph, throws a short pass to his running back. As he throws, a defensive player from the Browns, Myles Garrett, rushes in to tackle him. Typically, after the ball has been thrown, the defense will back off to prevent injury or to prevent themselves from getting a penalty or fine for unnecessary roughness. However, this time, Garrett wrestles Rudolph all the way to the ground. This is unusual because Rudolph no longer has the ball. Rudolph takes issue with this, and while they're on the ground, attempts to rip Garrett's helmet from his head unsuccessfully. But then, as Garrett gets up, he rips Rudolph's helmet from his head. Other players begin to intervene and push Garrett away from Rudolph. Rudolph gets up from the ground and begins to chase after Garrett, grabbing at his jersey. While being pushed backwards and with Rudolph's helmet in his hand, Garrett swings the helmet and clips Rudolph in the head with the inside of it.
Here's a flag as, whoa, hello, whoa. Yeah, that's Mason Rudolph got into it.
To get out of there.
What in the world? Believe Myles Garrett? They're swinging a helmet?
Yeah, there'll be some ejections coming out of this.
There may be suspensions.
That's right, suspensions.
As the fight was broken up and people began to process what happened, it became obvious that the blame for this would go to Myles Garrett. A narrative began to form as the announcers condemned his actions.
Beyond words, Joe.
Oh, my gosh, that's one of the worst things I've ever seen on a professional sports field.
They're absolutely. I mean, this is multiple game suspension right here. It's just. I mean, I hate that anybody even has to watch this.
The media condemned his actions.
To this game, and you rip the quarterback's helmet off and strike him on the head. Now, I've seen a lot of things in pro football, but that's one of the things that I have never seen. Like, that is literally assault right there by Myles Garrett. So I applaud.
The talking heads on Sports Show the next day condemned his actions.
Honestly, that was really hard to watch live. Shannon, have you ever seen anything like that?
No, I haven't seen anybody snatch a helmet. And he was very lucky that he hit him with the back of the helmet, Skip, because if he'd hit him with the top of the helmet, where the most protection is, because, you know, if you notice, Skip, you can bend the sides of the helmet because the most dangerous part of the brain is at the top. So you know what? They put the most protection there. He hits him at the top of his head. With that helmet, you snatch a guy's helmet off, and you take said helmet and hit the guy in the head. I believe at the bare minimum, he's gone for the rest of the season.
Everyone agrees that Myles Garrett was completely out of line when he used the helmet as a weapon against Mason Rudolph. After reading and watching news stories and discussing with others, I found myself a little isolated in my opinion. I thought what Garrett did was crazy, and he definitely deserved to be suspended. But I thought that people were going a little too far with their judgments. The more I heard commentary about Garrett, the more I wondered why no one was asking the question, why did Garrett swing the helmet? The story resonated with me because I've been the helmet swinger before. Granted, it was never a physical helmet, but the idea was the same. I flipped the table, I've yelled obscenities, I've punched the wall, I've been the loudest part of the news story. Despite my best efforts to avoid drama and walk away from situations that have been headed in the wrong direction, I've been the guy who did the thing that has no place in football. When the dust settled the next day and the league chimed in, Myles Garrett was suspended from football indefinitely. These were the consequences of his actions. I know consequences all too well. They're those things that show up after you do something that you thought was completely justified. They show up whether you like them or not. I've learned that lesson before. And I guess it was time for a refresher. Welcome to Time Well Spent. I'm Ronald. All right, so some of you know that I work at Starbucks as a barista part-time. On this particular day in early September 2019, I was in about the last hour of my shift and looking ahead to what I would get into after work was over. It was probably around 10:45 a.m., and the shift was starting to change, so the folks that would take over the store for the afternoon were beginning to come in, including a guy that, for the sake of this story, we'll call Tommy.
Obviously, since I wasn't there, how sassy was this? Was this
Okay, that's my friend Ben, and for reasons that will become obvious, he'll be voicing Tommy for this episode. And thank God, because the actual Tommy is not my favorite coworker. He's an instigator, and has often saying and doing things to people to get a reaction from them, positive or negative, it didn't matter. He just loved to instigate people to reaction. For instance, when I won Employee of the Quarter, he told me that another coworker of ours said that I didn't deserve to get it, which is one of those things that is so transparently meant to provoke, I didn't even know how to respond. I remember one time he came in and said to me,
"Oh, you still work here?"
To which, before I could stop myself, I responded, "You're not dead yet?" Y'all gotta pray for me. I struggle with Tommy as a human. So this day, Tommy came in talking a lot. He was scheduled to work, but was ordering a drink before his shift started. I was on register, so I took his drink order. He then proceeded to come behind the bar and start making his drink, which is a violation of Starbucks policy because he was out of uniform and not on the clock. I was at the refrigerator getting milk, and he says to me,
"So are you going to do some work today, Ronald?"
I responded, "What?"
"Are you actually going to do some work today?"
I completely resented this statement because I am a hard worker. I try to get things done quickly and correctly and always push to make sure that I'm not the weak link on the shift. Remember, I'm in the home stretch of this shift. I've just been through a rush, which is Starbucks speak for influx of customers for about 2 hours. And mentally, I'm ready to be home. I responded to him, "Why are you saying that to me? I don't like that you're saying that. Stop talking to me." He responded,
"I'm just saying you should do some work today."
This was Tommy's forte, making implications by saying or questioning something or talking like there was a conversation you weren't in, and he's here to address those issues. I said, "Stop talking to me. Are you even supposed to be on the floor?" Now, what's important here is I wasn't saying stop talking to me as some way to win the conversation. I seriously wanted Tommy to stop talking to me because he was making me upset. His presence alone is enough to raise the floor of my anger to about a 3 on the scale of 10. But when he started talking, I went from a 3 to a 5 relatively quickly. Tommy laughed and said,
"Oh, you're mad? I made you mad?"
I responded, "You're not even supposed to be on the floor. Just get out of here and stop talking to me." He then went over to a different part of the floor where he mumbled stuff under his breath and made jokes with another coworker of ours who I'll call Bart. Tommy mentioned something about making me mad, and I said, "Tommy, stop talking with me. Don't talk to me and don't say anything about me." He then looked at me and said,
"Oh, you're mad? I made you mad? Are 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 you mad?"
He said it about 10 times, but it felt like 100, and by now my anger had reached a solid level 6. I said, "Tommy, I'm serious. You need to stop playing with me. I'm serious. You need to stop talking to me right now." He then said,
"Oh, well, you can leave. I'm the shift on duty now, and if you have an attitude, you can leave."
This part really upset me for multiple reasons. One of them being that the current manager on duty was standing next to me during this entire exchange and said nothing. Secondly, it feels wildly unfair to be harassing an employee who reports to you, then sending them home when they take issue with the harassment. I responded, "You're not even on the clock." He responded,
"I'm the shift and you can leave. If you have an attitude, you can leave."
I then said, "Fine," and walked toward the door.
He's so mad. It's not like he's the one.
He was next to the door. He kept talking as I walked toward the door, and I had to pass him to get into the back room. I got really close to his face and looked up at him as he was slightly taller than I. I said in a voice that was surprisingly even and low, "Tommy, you better stop talking to me before I beat the out of you." This was my helmet swing moment. This was the part people would talk about later. While maybe for an average person it didn't warrant a threat of violence or cussing, neither of which I'm particularly given to, but in that moment I felt desperate. I really wanted him to stop talking to me, and in the moment that method felt like the easiest way to stop, since repeating myself wasn't working and my shift supervisor wasn't going to step in. I moved back from Tommy's face and walked into the back room. Tommy followed me in, still talking. I don't remember what he said, but I said to him, "I don't even know why you keep talking to me. I never said anything to you when you got here. You came in here talking. I never said anything to you. You initiated this." He responded and said,
"You always want to come in here and be argumentative with everyone."
This was Tommy's way of implying something again. I didn't give him a chance to continue. I cut him off and said, "Tommy, I never said anything to you. I don't talk to you because I don't like you. You're an immature prick, and I'm not leaving. You should leave." Then I walked back onto the floor, back onto the register. So I'm back at work serving customers and seething in anger. The current shift supervisor was still on the floor. He had still done nothing. He wasn't even addressing the fact that I was back on the floor and angry. This was probably the worst part. The anger began to subside and was quickly being replaced with remorse and regret. I understood the gravity of threatening someone at work. However, I've never felt more provoked at a job as a full-grown adult until that moment. Worst of all, I saw Tommy in the back on his phone. I assumed he was calling the store manager. At the time, I didn't know this, but he had gone past the manager and past the district manager. He essentially called Starbucks HR. He then went and sat outside and refused to come into the store until I left, which was about an hour later. I briefly touched base with my shift supervisor, who really wasn't much help, and left the store fuming, wondering why I even still worked there. Time well spent will continue in just a moment. Thanks for listening to Time Well Spent. I want to tell you about another Oh It's Big Ron Studios podcast called Leaving the Theater. It's a movie review podcast where I review movies as I'm leaving the theater. You get a raw, unfiltered, unedited reaction from me, and sometimes I even bring guests on to discuss the films with me. We have a lot of fun talking about the hits and misses from Hollywood. Once again, that's Leaving the Theater, and it's available everywhere you get podcasts. Welcome back to Time Well Spent. When I first started working at Starbucks, I had been laid off my full-time job in IT and I needed something fast. It was a means to an end. After a few weeks in, I realized there was a lot I enjoyed about working there. I felt like it kept me in a humble headspace. I enjoyed serving people, and I loved the idea of being a barista. Not only that, but Starbucks is at the center of all the hustles. It's the rendezvous point. It's part of the morning routine. It's the first date spot. It's the long time no see place. And I got to interact with folks in all of those various places in life. I'm a people person. I love talking and connecting with folks. Whether it was giving a stranger who looked like they were having a bad day a free drink unexpectedly, or giving my friends and family free drinks when they came to visit, or giving a regular customer a free... Okay, I really liked giving out free drinks. I also liked that I used my coffee benefit to give my dad a free pound of coffee every week. He liked that too. He came to expect it every time he saw me on Sundays at church. By the time of the incident with Tommy, it had been nearly 8 years since I started working there. I had long since gotten a new full-time job in IT, and there was no real financial need to work at Starbucks anymore. I stayed there because it's become part of my routine. I was still enjoying the idea of being a barista. But none of that was on my mind on the day of the fight with Tommy. Immediately after the incident, after speaking with my store manager, we agreed I should take the rest of September off. I returned to the store in October, but this time down to just 1 day a week, Saturday. My manager and I were on the same page. She understood how Tommy was and even said to me, "This sounds like a case of Tommy being able to dish it out, but not being able to take it." I wrote a statement about the incident and turned it in. I even talked to my district manager, who also seemed to think this would blow over with Tommy and I both receiving corrective actions or write-ups. Several of my coworkers commiserated with me in passing. I assumed I had become the threatening, angry black man, but it turned out most of them were sick of Tommy too. I still felt remorse for letting Tommy get the best of me, but it felt good to know my coworkers didn't think worse of me for what had happened. So it was surprising when a few months later my store manager called me and said, "Ronald, they're saying I have to fire you." I was shocked because I assumed that no reasonable person could have read the statement I provided and conclude that I was the one who needed to be separated from the company. Tommy was only written up. So I'm leaving Starbucks right now. Physically right now, I'm about to leave Starbucks. But also, I have just been, as they call it, separated from Starbucks, a.k.a. terminated, a.k.a. fired for violating the workplace violence policy, which probably sounds worse than it actually is when I tell you the story. I went in on Friday, November 15th, 2019, and talked to the district manager, who said HR forced her hand. She told me it didn't matter that in nearly 8 years at Starbucks I had never been written up, nor did it matter that she fought for me and disagreed with their decision. Whatever Tommy had stirred up by calling HR would not be resolved by a statement or finger pointing. At the end of the day, I had violated the workplace violence policy, and because of that, they said I had to go. One of the last things my district manager said to me was that she was in support of me appealing the decision. By this time, I was just frustrated at the length of this entire process and by the fact that it felt like I had never got the chance to present my case. I knew that HR had other witness statements, but I had no idea what story was being told on my behalf, besides the statement I had sent in myself. I needed to be heard, so I planned to appeal. On November 18, 2019, 4 days after the incident that cost him his NFL season, Myles Garrett filed for an appeal of the NFL's decision to indefinitely suspend him. I imagine that after some time and reflection, he decided it was worth stating his own view of what happened rather than having it contextualized by the sportscasters, media, and all the other parties who had an opinion on what they saw. November 18th was the same day I printed out the paperwork to appeal Starbucks' decision. On November 21st, Garrett lost his appeal when the NFL upheld the suspension against him. I hoped that my result would be different. My appeal was denied. I felt like it was denied in record time. One of the most annoying parts was that the person from HR seemed to drop the entire case back in my district manager's lap. You know, the one who said her hand was forced? The HR person said it was up to my district manager. My district manager said it was up to HR. My biggest problem was that in all of this, I felt like I was never given the opportunity to be heard. After some emails back and forth and my strategic use of the word discrimination, I was able to get someone to agree to a phone call with me, which I recorded.
Hello?
Hi, is this Ronald?
This is Ronald.
Hi, Ronald. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for letting me know a good time to reach you.
No worries.
Yeah.
The whole intent behind having this conversation was to try and compel someone to consider the entire situation as it was happening the way I experienced it. I felt like, given the opportunity to explain my case, it should be a no-brainer that both of us should receive the same penalty. That's kind of where HR started, explaining why our penalties were different. Also, just as a note, you're going to hear me say PRSC. That means Partner Resource Service Center. It's Starbucks speak for HR. And also, I've censored Tommy's real name, so you'll hear this organ sound in place of his real name.
Absolutely. The consult for your district manager did include what do we do based on what did to ignite the reaction from Ronald, right?
Mm-hmm.
Recommendations were made for you based on your individual participation in the situation, okay?
Yes.
So the reason why your action was separation is because we very consistently separate partners when there is a threat of violence, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And based on just looking at the statements of the situation, the majority witness statements confirmed that you had made a threat of violence to Eddie, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the review of the situation, what I can share with you is that there was no mention of threat of violence from Eddie to you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So how, but I'm trying to be careful on not sharing confidential information. So how it was addressed was appropriate based on his participation and what he did to provoke you, okay?
Uh-huh.
So with all that said, and without me going into the detail of how Eddie was addressed, that all appears appropriate to me. Now, if you feel like you're being discriminated against, I would want to understand what is the trigger of discrimination? Why are you being discriminated against? Does that make sense?
So HR is arguing that this is what they've always done: fire people for threats of violence, which isn't unreasonable, but requires zero nuance. My point is that based on the words used in their workplace violence policy, it doesn't make sense that Tommy doesn't get the same punishment. I begin to point this out in my response while reading the words of the workplace violence policy.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I'm saying I have your workplace violence policy here, and it says the actions include but are not limited to disruptive, aggressive, or abusive behavior that generates anxiety or creates a climate of distrust.
Yep.
That's you. Now, if we're saying multiple witnesses are saying that I threatened violence, are none of these multiple witnesses defining that Eddie was harassing me, and I asked him to stop several times?
Yeah. I wouldn't say harassment. I would say that the confirmation was that he was doing essentially what you said he was doing. There was no denying that he was repeatedly saying the things that you said he said. Does that make sense?
Yes, I understand that.
Now, just as a reminder for you listeners, HR is now confirming that the witness statements and my statement were the same, which means...
Oh, you're mad? I made you mad? Are 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 you mad? Oh,
what I described to you earlier wasn't exaggerated. This is confusing for me because HR is choosing not to define this as harassment, even though I've repeatedly said I asked Tommy to leave me alone several times. Also, keep in mind that at this point, I know Tommy didn't lose his job. So any reassurance she offers about him and the appropriate address of his part in the incident is falling on deaf ears. Side note, you're going to hear me incorrectly use the word intercede when I meant to use intervene.
And he was on the floor when he wasn't supposed to. He did all these things while I was at work. If I'm saying all these things are true, they're all disruptive and aggressive long before we get to a threat. If you say all those things are happening, that's already a violation of the workplace violence policy. So I'm saying, like, if there's no if Starbucks does not intercede, if Starbucks does not defend me at that point, I don't understand how the next action could be firing me for violating the workplace violence policy. That's where I'm saying it's discriminatory because you're not weighing both actions the same.
Well, I would say I understand where you're coming from, and I think where we're in disagreement, which may just be where we are, right? Let's keep that in mind, is that we may see and read this differently. Is that in his, from what, again, based off of the information we have and what you shared he said, what he said he shared, and witnesses, right? There was no verbal threat of violence on his part, so it does not qualify under workplace violence and how we would address workplace violence by making any sort of physical threat towards you.
Okay, I hear you. But then that means you have a problem in your workplace violence policy because it doesn't say physical, it says disruptive, aggressive, or abusive behavior that generates anxiety or creates a climate of distrust. If you're only going by physical actions that's not what the words say in this policy.
Well, and it's not just physical actions, right? But it is, again, in our interpretation of what happened, and it's not just me, right? There's been multiple perspectives on the situation. Our interpretation is that you violated the workplace violence policy, and that wasn't the violation that he had. Okay.
Okay, so as long as we're clear, you guys are defining it. You're defining it differently for him than you are for me.
We're defining what you did was different than what he did.
Okay, yes, but I guess that's where our disagreement is fundamentally. So I'm saying that it's discriminatory that you're basically not enforcing the workplace violence policy based on your own words in the workplace violence policy against than you are against me. And my question is, if you're not going to enforce it the same, the second part being, and if there's no defense from Starbucks on this in this situation, that means I as a partner or any other partner could be at work and be subject to disruptive, aggressive, or abusive behavior that generates anxiety or creates a climate of distrust and may have no recourse in which to protect themselves.
Well, I guess I would say that there wasn't no recourse. Right?
No, I say in this case,
have been taken.
No, I understand that. I'm saying in this case they would have no recourse because the shift supervisor didn't step in. Like nobody who was of authority at Starbucks stepped in to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah, I understand that.
So I'm saying,
I guess what I would point out is that in situations where there is a conflict, and even if you're the receiver of conflict. At the end of the day, if you react to that conflict with violence or threats of violence, you own that action, right? And that you had a choice in that moment on how you react. And it could have been walking away. It could have been going to talk to your manager or calling your manager.
the shift supervisor was in the store though. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying like,
no, I know.
In this scenario, you guys are you're putting the onus on somebody to say, because I'll say it like this: if he hadn't been talking to me and had instead been poking me and been like, "Hey, are you mad? Are you mad?" and been poking me the whole time, and then Eddie, I don't know, if Eddie slaps me or something like that, if the only justified reaction I have is to walk away or call my store manager, or if I then hit him back after he hits me or try to defend myself after he hits me, you're saying that I'm still liable to separation, and I don't understand how that protects partners. Especially if Starbucks is failing to protect its partners at that point, who can I count on to defend me if not myself? Especially when in every other situation or every other time there's been any type of conflict like this at the store, I've been able to count on a shift supervisor or someone else of authority to step in and be like, stop all that talking, get back to work, or something along those lines, get off the floor, whatever.
Yeah. But I guess what I would say is I hear you, and I do understand where you're coming from. I think the hard thing is that we do, in situations of conflict at work that escalate to threats of violence, physical violence, right? There is an evaluation of what is defense and what is furthering the escalation, furthering the conflict, right? Mm-hmm. And there has to be a judgment call there, obviously, right? Because every situation is going to be unique and different. And where the line is drawn is, was this true defense or was this furthering the escalation, right? Mm-hmm. And in your situation, the conclusion is that threatening to hit someone is furthering the escalation and not defense.
Okay. So you guys are content with your action on this. Do you guys don't have any other steps?
So at this point, I had made up my mind to sue Starbucks. I felt like any lawyer could reasonably argue that either this policy was poorly written or being selectively enforced. I completely understand that a threat of violence is a clear violation of the policy, but to choose to separate Tommy's action and punish it as if it weren't provocative just feels unfair. So then HR attempts to push me into saying what the basis for discrimination would be, which I honestly didn't know.
What I'm not hearing is discrimination in the sense of being treated differently for who you are versus your actions. I hear you being concerned about your actions being treated differently than Eddie's actions. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think you guys are. I think you're. I don't know what the bias is, but I think it could be easily argued that you guys are you're selectively enforcing the workplace violence policy, which is
based on what?
I don't know what it's based on, but I feel like it's pretty easy.
All right, so that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So I think what I'm hearing you say is you feel like we're addressing the workplace violence policy differently for you and Eddie.
Yes.
What I would share is that my assessment of it is that what you guys did were different, and that would result in a different form of things being addressed. What I can do is I can have a peer of mine take a look at your case and assess it on their own merit, and certainly can let you know from a second review perspective if we land in the same place.
I mean, that's fine if you want to do that. At this point, I got to be honest with y'all. Like, I feel like the black box process in which you guys have gone through this, that nobody's gone through this in a linear fashion and gone step 1 before we get to step 8, which is the alleged threat. Before we get to that point, nobody talks about the other 7 steps. And I appreciate you having this conversation with me. But to me, it's important to know that when I was at, there's a couple things important to know. I was at work at Starbucks. I was working. He came in there and was bothering me, and I asked him to stop several times. And even after the whole incident left, I was still at work. I was outside. My shift supervisor didn't support me. He didn't help me. I was alone in that store. And I feel like if at the end of the day, you guys come back after 2 months and say, Ronald, you're separated for this, after being with y'all almost 8 years with no write-ups, no incidents, and it comes to this, I really have a problem letting this go. And I'm very persistent. I'm not going to let this go. But if this is the route you guys want to take, I'm okay with that, because I think your policy has a hole in it that you guys aren't willing to address.
By the time I got off the phone with HR, I was resolute in talking to a lawyer and suing Starbucks for wrongful termination. I was frustrated because it felt like Starbucks was simply saying, you chose to threaten Tommy, therefore you tied our hands, while giving no credence to any other circumstances. Tommy was off the clock, behind the bar, and bothering someone who was at work. He kept doing it after he was asked to stop. No one backed me up, including the person whose job it was to manage the shift. It felt like even though I was finally being heard, that still no one was actually listening. So to wrap this process as I experienced it, the incident happened on September 7th, 2019. I was fired on November 16th. The phone call with HR happened on December 6th. The second appeal she mentions was completed on December 17th. It was also denied. I reached out to a lawyer on the same day. When I started working on this episode, it was right after I walked out of Starbucks after being fired. I knew I needed to process what happened. I assumed that after speaking to my district manager and thinking about the facts of my incident, there would be no way this wouldn't be overturned. I thought there would be a triumphant ending to this story. During the separation and appeal process, I had plenty of time to reflect about my entire experience working at Starbucks. A lot has changed since I started there. I've had 2 other jobs, I've moved apartments, I've owned 2 cars, and I've worked on 5 different podcasts, including launching this one. My life is a lot more busy than it was when I started at Starbucks. Sure, things had started great and all the warm parts of working there still existed, but lately, things seem to be getting harder than a 2-day-a-week part-time position should be. Customers were getting a little ruder, drinks were getting a little more complicated, coworkers were getting a little more difficult to work with. The other part is that with any less than stellar interaction that happens at Starbucks comes the thought, I don't need to work here. My IT job is enough to pay the bills, and frankly, I would love to have the extra time back. Besides liking the idea of still being a barista, I really didn't have a compelling reason to keep working at Starbucks. My problem was, I wanted to dictate when it was time to go. But apparently, that decision wasn't up to me anymore. So what's the status right now? Today, I'm still fired. Appeal denied, like Myles Garrett. I'm upset with myself for letting anger get the best of me. I'm upset at Starbucks for letting me take the bulk of the blame. I'm upset at the shift supervisor for doing absolutely nothing that day. I'm upset at Tommy for being a bad person. And don't get me wrong, I know I deserve a reprimand. I did something wrong here. But this outcome will never sit well with me. The lawyer I contacted was supposed to call me back and get the details of the incident, but they never did. And I won't chase them. I would love to feel vindicated and like justice was served, but the truth is, after reflecting, I realized I don't want to work at Starbucks anymore. I don't miss it. And even though I'm not happy with how it went down, it took processing it all for me to understand that there's way more appeal in this outcome than any outcome I can pursue myself. Special thanks to Ben Angeloni for voicing Tommy. On February 12th, 2020, Myles Garrett was reinstated into the NFL. He had to meet with the commissioner to get his job back. Being a professional athlete has a few more perks than being a part-time barista, so I imagine that's definitely a gig he wanted to keep. I wish him the best on his journey back. But that's where our parallels end. It took some time for me to get to this headspace. However, now that I'm not at Starbucks, I have plenty of time to spare. So sure, it felt uncomfortable to go through months of waiting for an outcome and then 2 appeals. But in the end, it honestly feels like time well spent. Time Well Spent is a production of Oh It's Big Ron Studios. Editing support from Lizzie Peabody and Juliet Heinley. Theme and additional music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Outro music by Michael Cordy. To find out more about this show and other Oh It's Big Ron Studios shows, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Oh It's Big Ron. That's at OHITSBIGRON. If you like this show, check out our sister podcast, Leaving the Theater. Thanks for listening to Time Well Spent, the podcast that nobody asked for, yet somebody is listening to. We'll be back soon.
Really? I've never used a mic before.
No, I know you have, but this is a directional mic.
I've never used one of those before.
All right, man. That's why you were facing this way.
Wow.
Okay. All right.
You're mad, huh?
Okay.
See, I'm getting
We're
into
getting into character. Okay. Cool.
Are you mad? Are you mad? I made you mad? Are you mad? Are you mad? I made you mad?
Sorry. What?
I'm channeling Perez Hilton right now.
Oh, this is so going on the
Why?
bloopers. Yeah, because it was perfect. That's what I wanted. But there was a part of me getting angry. I was like, stop saying that. Why are you saying that?
Triggered.
Oh, God. That was amazing.
Was that some PTSD right there?
Yeah. All right. So at this point,